Well, good evening. It is good in very many ways to be here from Michigan. First of all, we've got almost nothing that looks green up there yet. Nothing's blooming. Down here it looks awful green. We're probably a month behind you on our winter schedule. But the other reason it's good to be here is I feel like I'm coming back home. I'm a Missouri native, actually. I was born in Washington, Missouri. And I didn't spend too much time there, but I grew up on the Illinois side on a farm in southern Illinois, and my mom's a St. Louis girl. I married a Kansas City girl, so I feel like I've got very good roots here. And it was thrilling to see the Show Me Institute just about 3 years ago form in Missouri. If I'm not mistaken, Missouri was the largest state at that time that did not have a think tank devoted to analyzing public policy from a free market perspective. And as I'll show tonight, that's a critical part of the policy debate in any state. And so Show Me was a welcome addition and is going great guns. It's put itself on the map in public policy. Everybody understands what the Salvation Army does. And everybody understands what the Red Cross does. And these are all nonprofits. They're supported similarly to the way the Show Me Institute is supported, but think tanks like the Show Me Institute have a problem. Nobody knows what a think tank does or how it does it. So it's actually kind of the worst thing about working for a think tank is that you always have to say, now what in the world is a think tank and what do you do? My brother one time asked me, so are you thinking right now? And are you being paid overtime? Everybody understands that what the soup kitchen do, it helps hungry people, but few people understand how think tanks help establish public policy. And how do think tanks change public policy? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Well, first, some broad concepts. Public policy change starts with political change. All right? It isn't think tank guys who go in and vote for the public policy that becomes law. It's people in the political system. Elected officials. We even have at least one here tonight. Political change in a democracy starts with social change. And social change always precedes durable political change. So, yeah, you can pass a bill, but if it doesn't have some kind of broad support, for good reasons or bad reasons, it probably won't stay law long. Social change is an important part of public policy. Now, if you don't think this is so, if it strikes you a little funny, just think about this. Think about some other social movements that this country has had that have resulted in big policy changes, and ask yourself, would the policy changes have come if the social movements hadn't been there? What about the movement to abolish slavery? Can you think of anything that's more enshrined in our law in this country? You may not own another person, yet that began with a social movement, the movement to abolish that. What about the civil rights movement? What about the labor union movement? The prohibition movement, the suffrage movement, the environmental movement? And I'm not saying that all of these have resulted in great public policies, but the point is, social movements preceded these durable policy changes. So how do think tanks change? To know how think tanks change policy, we have to know how think tanks create social change. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that's patterned after something that Lawrence Reed used to ask his freshman students when he was a professor of economics years ago. Lawrence Reed is the first president of the Mackinac Center and my immediate successor. He was an economics professor like Joe is. Now, he used to ask this of his college freshmen, and I know everybody here is smarter than college freshmen. Right? Shouldn't have any problem with this. So, Joe, if you would go to this slide, what is it that determines whether a society embraces limited government or, on the other hand, whether that society embraces expansive government? So, go ahead and shout out your answer if you know the answer. What is it? Can you think of anything that influences a society one way or the other?
Popular sentiment.
Popular sentiment, right? That's related to it. What are some other things? Standard of living can certainly have a bearing. Any actors in society? What kinds of things have influence? Education is a big component, that's right. Hey, government itself can have an influence, that's right. Now, you know, Larry Reid asked this question of college freshmen. Did you know college is a place where knowledge accumulates? The freshmen come in with some, and the seniors don't leave with much, and so knowledge accumulates in college. But no, the answer that Larry was looking for to this question was not the things that have been mentioned so far. People or the institutions that they create do play important roles, like the schools, like the political parties, factors like standard of living, but they don't explain why people behave the way that they do. And some people have even explained that it's just because it's fun to spend other people's money. Go ahead, Joe. It's not a liberal or conservative thing necessarily. You may not be able to read this in the back, but Senator Yomp is talking to his colleague there, and he says, liberal or conservative, it's just fun spending taxpayer money. But that isn't ultimately what influences it either. Joe? The thing that determines whether a society embraces limited government or society embraces expansive government is ideas. It's so basic we might not even have thought of it. But ideas themselves underlie huge changes in how societies are organized like that. Victor Hugo, the author, famously said that ideas are more powerful than all the armies of the world. It is ideas that create a stage on which all of us perform. Think about it. Almost every single thing that surrounds us, whether it's an object or an institution or a way of doing things, is the result of somebody's idea. Joe? Lawrence Reed summed it up this way in a pamphlet that he wrote in 1994 for our think tank, the Mackinac Center. What people believe determines how they behave, who they vote for, what laws and rules they embrace, and what kind of system they'll work to achieve. Change ideas and you can change the course of history. Now, is there any way to channel these ideas? Let's look at the way a famous economist, perhaps the most influential economist of the 20th century, described the power of ideas. Next slide, Joe. John Maynard Keynes said the ideas of economists and political philosophers, when they're right and when they're wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Sooner or later, it is ideas and not vested interests which are dangerous for good or evil. And so, if we get our minds around the idea that it is ideas themselves that determine our destiny as far as how we organize society, and we have to ask ourselves, well, is there any way to channel these ideas, or are we simply at the mercy of nameless, faceless intellectual forces? Well, I want to tell you a little story about a man who grappled with that question. After World War II, a British fighter pilot, who later became a stockbroker, who later became a farmer, he was concerned that the nation that he and his family members had fought for in World War II would lose the fight to remain free even after they had won the war. In Great Britain, socialism was galloping in, and he was very concerned about this. And so he sought an economist named Friedrich Hayek, who eventually went on to win a Nobel Prize.